Lake Titicaca, an ex-wife, and the impossible desire to forget. A true travel story by Grayson Ferguson. Drink coca tea, the elder woman said. It helps with altitude sickness. She had an indistinguishable English accent, the kind that sounds both Australian and British. I nodded, then returned my gaze to the passing world outside the bus window. The rolling green under cloudless blue. My thoughts were somewhere far beyond the naked hills. The local Bolivians use coca tea to cure everything, the woman sitting to my left continued on, not taking my hint from my lack of a response. It is very ceremonial to them. If they're not chewing it, they're drinking it, or turning it into candy. The government, years ago, tried to take it away. Because coca leaves are used to make cocaine. But the locals, especially the indigenous tribes, they didn't care what laws were passed. They kept using it, and the government relented. I wished she would relent. I napped the first hour after departing the station out of La Paz, well before the rising sun. But thoughts and thin air woke me. At 12,500 feet, my body struggled in its search for oxygen, leaving me in a constant state of near anxiety-induced hyperventilation. Locals said I'd get used to it. The woman next to me said to drink tea. Is this your first time visiting Lake Titicaca? Yes. Well, no. I realized my mistake all too late. You have but haven't? The outside world would need to wait for my attention. Not the Bolivian side. I've been to the Peruvian side. The Bolivian side is much prettier. You'll like it better. I hoped I would. Years earlier, more than a decade, my wife and I visited the lake while in Peru. We fought the entire time. She took the tour of the mystical waters and visited the locals living on man-made floating islands. I stayed in the hotel room and watched Seinfeld. I never asked how the tour went. She never told me. The bus stopped. Outside, a small town clung to the bank of a lake so deep blue it had no choice but to be cold. The driver instructed in Spanish. We were to disembark and take a short ferry to the other side, then reboard the bus and continue on. Doing so kept us from crossing into Peru. It kept me further away from hard memories I wanted but didn't. I decided to travel to Bolivia to see the lake I missed while avoiding familiar paths, to take in a view from the other side. The small town resided in a perpetual fog of dust and gasoline fumes, kicked up from buses stopping and motorboats waiting. It muffled the aromas of whatever food street vendors hawked, and I wasn't hungry for diesel. The monument of a native warrior stood in the center of what looked to be the town's only plaza. He held his arms skyward, an offering I could not make out in his hands. You see, Peru and Bolivia are very close, the old woman said to my back. Wanting to be left alone, but not wanting to be rude, I slowed so she could walk at my side. Bolivia once had an ocean coastline, but Chile stole it from them. Peru helped Bolivia fight, but they never got the land back. A naval cadet directed us to an aged motorboat with flooring suspiciously saturated, and more patchwork existed on the siding than I'd prefer. He handed me a life jacket. I put it on. So don't ask Bolivians about Chileans, the woman continued. Although you probably shouldn't ask Peruvians about Chileans either. They're mad at Chile for different reasons. So are Paraguayans and Argentinians. Just don't ask anyone about Chileans. I won't. Maybe if they all sat down around coca tea, they could smooth things out. You really like coca tea. It makes everything better, including diplomatic relations. It couldn't hurt. The ferry ride took 4 minutes to the other side. It didn't sink. I handed my life jacket to the cadet and climbed out of the boat. A similar town, sitting in its own cloud of dust and fumes, greeted us. Another statue of a native warrior stood in the center plaza, arms extending his offering to the sky. The same offering as the mirrored village across the lake? Or did he compete for his god's favor with a larger gift? The bus arrived, transported on his own flatbed ferry. I returned to my seat. So did the old woman. Just an hour longer, she said to me. Another passenger asked her a question. She happily offered an extended answer. I turned to watch the passing scenery. Rolling hills, afterthoughts of the Andes, slunk toward the blue lake, its color as dark as a nighttime sky. Small structures of red bricks squatted in the hills, but there were no people, only scurrying dogs and the occasional silhouetted bird. I couldn't remember the bus ride with my wife, the countryside, the sky, the colors, just the fight. It was a stupid fight, one of many, about nothing. Funny how a lot of nothing can corrupt everything. Recrossing my legs, one thigh began to tingle as it threatened to fall asleep. With little room between my knee and the seat back in front of me, I flexed the muscle while massaging it, trying to improve the blood flow without drawing too much attention to myself. "Your leg falling asleep?" the old woman asked, shattering my attempt at massaging inconspicuously. I nodded. "Yeah, they don't give you much room on these buses. They are made for locals, and the locals are short, so not much room is needed. Public transit. The only time it's better to be short." The old woman laughed. I continued to flex and rub. The starbursts of tingling muscles eventually subsided. In a way, distraction felt good, from lingering on what no longer was. I had long wanted to return to Lake Titicaca, to take in what I missed so many years in the past. But I did not want to travel the same path, to relive the fights and the eventual loss. We had long stopped yelling at each other, which made things worse. Yelling stems from passion, something we both no longer had. I didn't want to relive those memories, but what had I expected? To look at the site of one of my greatest failures from the other side and feel nothing? I would not visit the same restaurants or sit in the same bar with the Red Hot Chili Peppers playing in the background, but those memories lingered around my head like the dust and diesel of those small villages. We divorced not long after that trip. Eventually, we lost contact. No, that's not the best way to put it. Lost would suggest someone misplaced a number or was locked out of their Instagram. We stopped communicating. The hurt too great for me. For her, I don't know. She moved on, remarried, had a life. Maybe she healed faster. Maybe she had nothing to heal from. The bus followed the curved hills toward the lake. The vibrant red brick buildings, as if sponsored by Technicolor, became more prevalent, clinging to the roadway like stone weeds. The buildings grew, but never taller than a second story. Dogs of indistinguishable breeds watched the bus with indifference as they lazily sunned themselves. Turning around slender roadways never designed for buses, or for that matter, modern automotive travel, the driver expertly missed clipping the brick walls and overhanging signs, although more than a couple curbs were hopped. With no station in sight, we stopped at a random street corner. The old woman stood from her seat, stretching for the ceiling before massaging the joints of her fingers. "This is it?" I asked. "This is it. The bus office is right outside. Nothing more than one room large enough for a desk. When it's your time to leave, don't expect a waiting room or a seat. Better off using the cafe across the street." "I'll keep that in mind." We disembarked. Claiming my oversized backpack from the bowels of the bus, I looked up the hotel address on my phone. A mile away. Not bad. Although I doubted there were many options other than walking. The upward slope started gentle enough. For a time, a pair of dogs joined me, staying far enough to avoid pets but close enough to jump at scraps, should anything delicious fall out of my pockets. Eventually, the dogs gave up as the incline steepened, and with it, the effects of the altitude. Lungs don't burn at high altitudes like those of overworked joggers or athletes. Lungs pump and sift, looking for any usable oxygen to feed a demanding bloodstream, like trying to drink water from an empty bottle. Instead, the overworked lungs and oxygen-depleted blood delivered the headache of a hangover without any of the fun. There were no effects of altitude sickness in Peru with my wife. At least none I could remember. Perhaps I blamed whatever headache I had at the time on the stress of fighting. More thoughts buried somewhere in my past. I stopped at a large stone oddly sitting on the side of the road, as if it was destined for a great construction at the top of the mountain, but stopped for a rest and never continued onward. I leaned against it, heart thumping as it worked overtime to send diluted oxygen to the rest of my body, pumping like it did in the midst of an argument with my wife as we sat at that dive bar with 90s rock thumping. We occupied a table in the corner together the day after she took the lake tour. We agreed to go out, yet I don't think either of us really wanted to, but sitting in the hotel room felt worse, strangling, so we ducked into the dimly lit bar playing familiar music. We ordered dive bar food and random drinks from the menu. I no longer remember what we ate or what we drank, but I think those were our last shared cocktails. Had I known it would be our last, I might have ordered something different. Memorable. On the wall behind my wife's head hung a painting. It looked like a Georgia O'Keeffe. I couldn't tell if it was a tree malting its bark or a brownish turquoise vagina. Pulling out my camera, I motioned for my wife to move in closer to the painting. She flicked me off as I captured the moment. Thinking back on the photo, which has long since been deleted, I remember what the psychedelic malting vagina tree looked like. I don't remember my wife, other than annoyance and a raised middle finger. Continuing up the hill, I huffed and sucked for air, chest heaved as quickly as it collapsed on itself. My head swirled in a fog of lightheadedness. My heart hurt from a lack of oxygen, from the abundance of memories. I checked my phone, another half-mile to the hotel. Thoughts of my ex-wife accompanied me the remainder of the walk. At the top of the hill, the small hotel stood, peeking over the cliff for a view of the lake and the crescent moon beach with small, colorful buildings clinging to the sand as if bright stones washed up on the shore. And beyond the town, somewhere across the water, where the Peruvian counterpart town stood, a past long since gone. An alpaca walked past, giving me no mind as a small bell tied around its neck clanked like pennies in a glass jar. It settled in for a meal of spear grass at my side. The altitude didn't seem to bother it. The hotel consisted of a series of white, domed suites with oval windows and blue accents, as if someone had flown over a chunk of Santorini and nestled it into the Bolivian countryside. At the front desk, a young blonde with a French accent took my information. Maybe she once visited the lake in search of something, only to remain once it was found. "Your room is not yet ready," the blonde said. "It is still a little early." "That's okay. I'll enjoy the view with the alpacas." "Can I get you anything while you wait?" I considered. "Do you have any coca tea? I've heard it cures everything."